So let me show you how to use the AutoMinMax module to automatically generate minimum and maximum quantity levels for each and every item at each and every store. So the first step you need to do is to update the Delta table. So we'll do that now. We'll go to Tools here, Update Delta. We'll just need to log in to the Technicians Toolkit here, which will perform the Delta update. And there you go. Now the Delta table is storing changes in the database. And that information is typically used by Retail Pro when it needs to create calculations for example, statistics. It's also being used by things like the AutoMinMax sales analysis, which will be steps 2 and 3. Okay? Now keep in mind, the updating of the Delta table can be done automatically, whenever you want, so you don't have to do it manually. Go ahead and shut this down. Let's do step 2. Now step 2 requires us to go into inventory, and on the side menu there's a button called SRO analysis. Now this is actually a feature that allows you to see sales information, receiving information, and on order or purchasing information directly from the Retail Pro inventory screen without running a report. And by the way, this can be scheduled to run automatically as well. So the data you view in inventory is always fresh. For example, you might want to see sales data for just yesterday. So you would set this to be yesterday. Or you may want to see receiving information for the month, right? Month to date. And you may want to see purchasing information forever, right? So all active purchase orders. Now you would run this or schedule this to run every night as an example. So then your store managers might be able to come into Retail Pro, and let me just show you some of the fields here. And if you add these fields to the screen, let's see here, here it is. Store sold quantity, store received, store on order. So this information will be up to date, and immediately your sales managers or your employees would see for a given item what is sold yesterday, what it received this month, what you currently have on order of that item. Okay, so that is the SRO analysis. Now for AutoMinMax purposes, you just need to do a sales analysis, okay, using SRO. And make sure the date range here covers a sufficient period of time. So for example, if you plan to analyze for min and max purposes only this year's worth of data, make sure your SRO analysis, or at least the sales portion of your SRO analysis, covers that same time frame. Okay, so for example, I might make this 2012, June 2012 to June 2013, and then you would run it. Okay, so let me go ahead and just select for sub 1 all my stores, then I'll run it. And I'm done. Okay, so that's step 2. Now step 3 will require that you get into the AutoMinMax module, which is right here. Now before you do that, go to the AutoMinMax page, okay, because you'll need some of these fields here, and make sure you add these fields if it's not there. You want to make sure that the store min and max is there, new min, new max, start date, end date. And let me actually show you Page Manager here. So here it is, auto min max, new min, auto min max, new max, auto min max, start date, end date, sold quantity, and then this yearly, which should really say auto min max yearly, okay, which is your annual sales total. All right, now let's go to step 3. So auto min max, it's a wizard. So just click through this. We'll go to change min-max options. And we need to do for step 3 another sales analysis. Now this is a sales analysis within the Auto Min-Max wizard, the Auto Min-Max tool. Okay, so again, make sure you have a sufficient range. For example, if you have items that are selling all year long, maybe you want to specify a date range that represents the sales for that particular item, okay, or items. So for example, I might want to do, again, going back to 2012 to 13 and run this. Okay, now if you have any seasonal goods, same thing. You may want to filter for those seasonal items, okay, or groups of seasonal items with the same sales period, and then filter for the sales period itself. So for example, if you have seasonal goods that sell only in the summertime, you want to filter just for those summer periods. Okay? Again, specify the date range, filter for those items, and then do another sales analysis. So you may ultimately need to do several runs here, filtering for specific groups of items that are seasonal items. Maybe you have different seasons, so those are different passes, right? And then you, of course, would have a general pass for all the items that sell all year long. Okay? Certainly take time during this step because this information will ultimately feed into the formulas that you'll be using to auto-generate your mins and max quantity levels. So for training purposes, I'm just going to specify undefined, which is all history. I won't do any filtering. And I'll go ahead and do a sales analysis for all my stores. Then I will select Analyze Sales. Now, if this step is successful, you'll see behind you here on the actual page, let me go and just select Finish and save this. You'll see a start date and an end date, which corresponds to your sales range, okay? And then actual sales quantity or sold quantity. So this is the amount sold within that range, okay? And this is the amount per year. Now, if your sales range is more than 1 year, this yearly amount is the yearly average. If your sales range is less than a year, for example, some seasonal goods, then this would be a projected yearly sales. Okay, so we'll take that quantity and project out 365 days to give you a yearly total. Now, both these numbers are quite useful for the next step, which is to generate your formulas or create your formulas. So let's go back to Auto Min Max. And this time we'll go back to Change Min Max options. We'll hit Next. And this is where you can create your formulas. So for example, I might have vendor-specific formulas that are based on vendor lead time. For example, let's say I sell shoes and I get shoes from Nike. So I might filter for Nike items, right? I'll just type it in here. Okay, so this formula down here will apply only to items within this filter. Okay, and so for example, I might specify days of supply as 7. What does this mean? What does DOS, days of supply, means? That's the number of quantity needed to last the specified number of days. So if I specify 7 days, Retail Pro will look at each and every Nike item, and based on the historical sales for those Nike items, Retail Pro will determine how many units are required to last you 7 days. Okay, so for example, let's say you have a Nike item that sells 2 units per day. Okay, historically speaking, and that's based on the last step, right? Based on your sales analysis. So if you sell 2 units per day, and it takes you 7 days to receive the goods from Nike after placing the order, right? 7 days of supply. Well, that means that you would need at least 14 units to last you those 7 days, right? Because if you pick up the phone on day 1, right, and the shipment arrives on day 7, and you're selling 2 units per day, you'll run out right when you receive the goods. Does that make sense? So days of supply really corresponds to roughly the lead time, the vendor lead time. So typically, if you're using days of supply, it's usually based on a given vendor. So for example, I might have another formula. I'm going to hit the down arrow here. I might have another formula, let's say for my Puma items. And again, I might filter for my Puma items. Okay. And by the way, if you do this, I would strongly advise that you create different filters. Okay. So for example, I can go to Manager here and create a new filter. Okay, and this filter, for example, I can rename it and call this my Puma filter. Oops, I'm misspelling that. Puma. Okay, and for my Puma, there you go. All right, so my Puma filter will be applied to this Puma formula, and my default filter will be applied to this Nike, right? So for the Puma filter, or the Puma formula, excuse me, maybe it's a 5. Maybe it takes 5 days for my Puma merchandise to arrive from the supplier after I pick up the phone, place an order, and drop the phone. Okay? So again, if you have an item, let's say a Puma item that sells 5 units per day, and it takes you 5 days to receive the goods after placing the order, well, simple math tells you that you should at least have 25 units of that item to last you those 5 days while you're waiting for the new shipment, right? So you can have as many formulas as you want, okay? So if you have 50 different vendors with all different days of supply, then you can certainly set up different formulas for each supplier. Okay, so actually let me change this back. So this would be 5 and Nike would be, say, 7 in my example. Okay, now quantity. What does quantity mean? Quantity is basically, and this is can be part of your formula as well. So quantity basically means user specified quantity. It's basically a user requirement that may or may not have anything to do with the sales history, the sales analysis. For example, let's say that again for my Puma formula here, I'm using days of supply 7. So Retail Pro, please suggest a min for each and every item that lasts me 7 days worth of supply. Okay, so quantity can be used alongside that days of supply calculation. For example, I might put in a quantity of 20. If I do that, then the condition becomes important because now I need to choose the lesser of or the greater of these two numbers. If I choose the lesser of, here's what's going to happen. Let's say you have an item that sells, again, 2 units per day. Okay, so you have this Puma item that sells 2 units per day, and it takes you 7 days to receive the shipment. So you would need, for that particular item, 14 units to last you those 7 days, right? Now, Retail Pro will take that 14 and compare it against the specified quantity of 20 and choose the lesser of those two values. Okay, maybe 20 represents how much shelf space you have for Puma shoes. You can really, at most, let's say, support or display 20 Puma shoes. That's all the room you have. So for this particular item that sells 7 units per day, sells 2 units per day, to last you 7 days, that's 14 compared to 20. Choose the lesser of those two numbers. 14 will be suggested as the min for that item. Now let's say you have an item that sells 3 units per day. Okay, another Puma item sells 3 units per day. Well, to last you 7 days, that would be a 21 quantity, right? You would need 21 units to last you 7 days. But Retail Pro will compare that against a quantity of 20. Remember, that's your max shelf space, and choose the lesser. So the lesser here is the 20. So even though your sales history will support 21 units of this item, your shelf space will only limit you to 20. So 20, being the lesser of the two numbers, will be suggested as the min for that particular item. Does that make sense? So these two numbers can potentially work together. Okay? Now keep in mind, each and every formula has a minimum formula and also a maximum formula. So the same formula has two parts, minimum and maximum. So for example, with my little Puma formula, 7 days of supply, okay, that's how long it takes for me to receive my shipment. Now the max could be something like this. I might put a 31 there. Now what does that represent? That could represent 31 days because that's how often I place orders. Maybe I order from Puma every 31 days, every 30 days, every month, right? So when I place an order, maybe I plan to order just enough to last me 31 days. Again, I don't place an order. I won't be placing an order for another 31 days. So I want to make sure when I do place an order, I order enough to last me those 31 days. Okay, so for an item that sells 2 units per day, that would be 62. I would need to order 62 in order to last me 31 days. Does that make sense? Again, you could have a quantity here as well. Okay, a quantity here as well. Whether it's a number like this, maybe you want to put a 50. That corresponds to how much money you have to spend on Puma shoes each and every month. Okay, and again, if you specify these two values, Retail Pro will look at the condition to determine which one to use. Okay, in this case, the lesser of either 31 days worth of supply or 50. Okay, so an item sells 2 units per day, 31 days, that would be 62 compared to 50, choose the lesser of, so the max here would be 50. If I choose the greater of, right, then Retail Pro would choose 62. Does that make sense? Now, a good real-world scenario would be here. This could very well be linked to shelf space. So you only have that much, room to stock Puma shoes. And that's on the maximum side. So you'll order enough to last you 31 days, but you're limited by how much you can store. Okay, so for those high-selling items, maybe you can't order as much as you would like. Now on the minimum side, you might say, hey, order enough to last me 7 days worth of supply, because that's how long it takes for me to receive the shipment. But the quantity here could actually mean something else. The quantity could be how much looks good on the sales floor, right? So you may want to say something like this, a 10, and then choose the greater of the two numbers. So think about it. So for an item that sells 2 units per day, you'll order 14. That will last you 7 days. But for an item that sells, let's say, 1 unit per day, technically you only need to order 7 to last you 7 days worth of supply, but it doesn't look as good on the sales floor. Maybe you want to make sure that, on the sales floor you have at least 10 boxes, 10 units. So in this case, the greater of the two for an item that sells 1 unit per day would be 10. So 10 would be suggested as the min for that item. Okay, and for that same item that sells 1 unit per day, 31 would be specified as the max. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Now, let me do another one here. I'll do a test account here with no filter. Now, percent increase in annual sales. Annual sales, if you check this, okay, whether it's for the max or for the min, if you check this, basically what Retail Pro would do is it would take the yearly number, and again, this could be a yearly average, or it could be a projected yearly total, and use that as your min or as your max. Okay? Now, people who do this typically are ordering one time per year, right? So they may say, hey, what did I sell last year? Because that's their sales analysis date range. What did I sell last year? Maybe I'll use that number to determine what I need to order this year. Now, the other option is percent increase. And this could be a percent increase, 10%. So this would be like 10% over the yearly total. So let's say your business is going well and you want to take last year's sales, add 10% to it, and then use that as your min because you plan to order up to that 10% above last year's sales. Okay? Or on the flip side, maybe this year wasn't so hot. You didn't do so well. So you want to take last year's yearly as an example, if that's your sales range. Take that number, reduce it by 10%, and use that as your min. And maybe you plan in the future to order up to your min, which will be the same as ordering 90% of what you sold last year. Okay? Now keep in mind, you don't need to check this box and use a percent increase at the same time. It's a bit redundant. Okay? So if you just specify percentage, Retail Pro knows this is on annual sales. Let me go ahead and zero that out. Okay, great. I'll uncheck that as well. Okay, the last one that you have here is out of stock. Now, out of stock, if you check this, and actually, let me do this. Let me go back to Puma here, and I'll check it here. Okay, basically what out of stock means is that out of stock will reassess your sales analysis to take into account days where you didn't have any stock at all to sell. So for example, if you have an item based on your sales analysis, let's say we have this item here. So based on our sales analysis, we sold, this amount, whatever that amount is. And let's say that corresponds to a units sold of 5 a day. Let's make it easy. Let's say 2 a day. Okay, so based on your sales analysis, you're selling 2 a day of this particular item all year long. Now, would that number be higher or lower if you knew that 1 month out of the year, so 30 days, 31 days, you were actually out of stock? So actually, if you took that into account, you may have sold more, right? If you weren't out of stock, you may have actually sold more than 2 units per day. Maybe it was 2.5, 2.6, 3 units per day, if you took into account the fact that you actually were out of stock 30 days, 60 days out of the year. Okay, so that's what this number does. This number will make sure that your actual units sold per day value, okay, which isn't displayed on the screen unfortunately, but it's in the system. It will make sure that that units sold per day value is correct or more correct, taking into account out of stock days. So usually I recommend people just check it. I think it's a good option to just check. Okay? All right. So once you set up all your formulas, you can then, in the next step, use them to calculate your new min and max quantity levels. Okay? Now for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just I'm going to uncheck these really quick. And let me just do a generic formula, right? That basically will just make sure I have some mins and maxes so we can use it later on. Okay, so I'll just make sure everything is a 10 for my min and everything is a 30 for my max. Okay, again, this is only for training purposes. In the real world, you most likely will be using vendor-specific formulas, and the most common is to use days of supply with or without a user-specified quantity. Okay, so again, for training purposes, I'll just make everything 10. Oops, I'm sorry, 10 for the minimum and 30 for the maximum. Okay, I'll save this and I will move on to next. Okay, and step 5 is to calculate our mins and max quantity levels. Let me do that now. And what that does, look behind you here, that will specify or calculate the new suggested mins and maxes. Okay, this has not updated Retail Pro as of yet. Now, step 6. Let me go and just select finish here, and I'll go right back in so I can get to the update section here. So I'll say update min max. And now I'm ready to update Retail Pro with the suggested min and max quantity levels. So here you can update all your quantities, okay? Or update only those items with a min and max, or you can update all items. So if your min and max is 0, it will zero out the old min and max. Okay, I'll go and just say update all. And do you want to filter for any items? Okay, so I can say no. Let me clear this. So go and update all my items across all my stores and update. And I'm done. So notice now I have new mins and new maxes for each and every store. Okay, so this is for store 1. This is store 2, and so on. Okay, that's it. That's how to use the Auto Min Max module to automatically set up new mins and max quantity levels for each and every item at each and every store.